All right, well, my name is Sharon Squires, for any of you who don't know me. And my day job is with Thrivent Financial. I'm a certified financial planner and a retirement income certified professional. And then I'm also pretty active with the church. And and the capital campaign and all of the inner workings of that. And we've been having some meetings in the last several months talking about just financial education for the church and long-term giving, and talked about ways that we could try to help educate people. And this is Foundation Month, November, and so we like to talk about long-term giving. But one of the things that I find in my daily life is that people have a hard time feeling generous with their finances unless they feel really confident about their current finances, and if they're going to have enough to live on and be able to retire on, and even just understanding what their current situation is. And so then you throw in the whole new tax package that, there's a lot of information out there, but until you actually go through it and look at how it's going to affect you, I think a lot of people have a lot of trepidation about paying a lot more tax. And so earlier this year, when the information about the new Tax Act started to come through, we have a tax program that we use called What If Tax, where we can enter a tax return from one year and then go in and sort of play with it and say, well, what if we change this or add this? How does that affect your taxes? And it's a great visual tool because it makes it so easy to see how different triggers will affect your taxes, and then kind of how, once you understand how they work, then you can have a little more control over how maybe you would not manipulate them in a bad way, but utilize windows of opportunity that you have. And so to that end, I have a couple of ways that we could go through it. I have a presentation where we can sort of walk through some of it, but it also can be sort of dry. And so that's why I printed this off. It's a really good overview of the main changes. This is the Tax Cuts and Job Act flyer, brochure, whatever you want to call it. And I'm not going to walk through all of it right now, but I thought it would be nice to have this to take home. What I like about it is that if you go to page 2, it shows the pre-existing law and then the current law right next to each other, so you can see specifically what the things were that were changed right next to each other. And then what I was doing with my Joe Lutheran computer, trying to create someone that we could go in and play with, so you can actually see that what if that I was talking about. What I think is interesting is that for all of the clients where we have run their what if tax just to see last year versus this year, most people were surprised, and all of the different changes made very little impact on them. And there's so much information out there. I was really nervous at first, when we heard about the limitations on writing off state income taxes, and what's that going to do for people in California, and we're going to have to support the rest of the country. And then when you actually go in and look at it and see, because the brackets, the income tax rates on the brackets were reduced and then expanded, which I'll show you, that has helped to mitigate a lot of those other things that might have caused more taxes. So first question is, are you all familiar with how the tax brackets work? No. Okay. All right, so a brief overview. If you look at this first page, this actually describes it. So if you are, let's say you're single, let's look at the first column, and you make $100,000 a year in taxable income. Look at the tax rates on the left. Those show what the percentage is for each piece of income. So if you make $9,500, you're going to pay 12% tax on everything between $9,500 and $38,000. And then you're going to pay 22% tax on the income that you make between $38,000 and $82,000. So a lot of people here they're in the 24% tax bracket and they think they have to pay 24% tax on everything, and that's just on the, the higher income. And where the brackets are really important is when it comes to looking at your deductions, like into your 401k or charitable contributions, because that's when the bracket really makes a difference. So whatever changes you make are going to affect the top part of your income. So I'm going to pull up Joe Lutheran here, and I'm sorry, I think I have to sit over here to do it. It appears. Okay, so show you what I did here. I entered Joe Lutheran with some very basic. Oh, sorry, Joseph Luther. Joe Luther. We had to change him. Now we're a Christian organization. We're not just Lutheran, so maybe that's why it didn't let me put in Lutheran. Okay, so what I did for this example is I said, let's pretend Joe Luther makes $100,000 a year for a nice, simple number. And then I, just to show you another piece, I added Social Security income. So that's why it's a little bit higher. And actually, I'm going to go back and show you the details before I show you this part. Okay. All right, so here, if you look at the first column over here and on this 2017 actual, $100,000 of income. I said they make $5,000 of taxable interest. $24,000 of Social Security benefits, and this little notification here is to let us know that most of that Social Security income is going to be taxable, and that's because they're making more than $35,000 a year. So up to 80% of Social Security can be taxable depending on your other income. And then I said, oh, let's give him a $6,500 IRA tax deduction. And let me go to Schedule A. So this is where your deductions are. So I said that they had $10,000 of medical and dental expenses for this year. $5,000 of state and local income taxes. There it is. $8,000 in personal property taxes. $15,000 in home mortgage interest. And so, if you don't know, the limitation on state and local income taxes is that you can only write off $10,000 between the two. So you see how there's $13,000 of total taxes. In 2017, that the whole thing would have been a write-off. In 2018, only $10,000 is. The home mortgage interest, and all of this is in that printout too, is limited to a mortgage of $750,000. The old law was $1 million. So if you have a mortgage that's $1 million, you still can write off the interest, but if you buy anything new, then you're limited to the interest on $750,000 instead of $1 million. And they were talking about that being only $500,000, which would have impacted a lot of people in California. Gifts to charity. So I put in $10,000 just again for a 10% tithe and a simple number. And you can see that it's not reduced. And I feel like there's been a lot of kind of misinformation about that, where people think that your charitable deductions are severely limited in the new law, and they really they aren't. I think where some of that confusion comes into play is that our standard deductions were doubled. And so then a lot of people feel like, well, I wasn't giving more than that, so I'm not going to be able to get any additional tax benefit. And that may be true for a lot of people. But when it comes to planned giving, which is typically a larger kind of gift that people will do, for example, if you were giving, say, a piece of property or a stock, appreciated stock, and you wanted to, that's going to be like a one-time gift, there are limits as to how much of that you can write off based on what your income is. And so in the new tax law, it actually increased the amount that you can write off from 50% of your income to 60%. So it was actually a positive, but people don't talk about that very much. So that's the biggest change there. And then, let's see. Okay, so let's go back. To here. Okay, so, so for this Joe Luther guy, his itemized deductions were $39,000 in the old tax law. The standard deduction would have been $12,000, so he would have been able to write that whole $39,000 off. Now in 2018, the standard deduction is $24,000, but that's still less than his itemized deductions, so he'll use the itemized deductions. And the exemptions is another thing that has changed. So you used to get $4,000 times the number of people in your family, which was essentially another deduction, and that has gone away. And in many cases, just sort of replaced by that doubling of the standard deduction. The other thing that they did, I don't think any of you have young kids, but there's a tax credit that you get for having kids. So that was one of the things that was supposed to offset the negative of getting rid of the exemptions, because if you had 4 or 5 kids in your family, and then you got rid of those 4 or 5 exemptions, that is a bigger number than the increase in the standard deduction. So and this also, the details are in your handout, but they increased they increased the way that people can get a child tax credit based by the age of the kid, and they increased the income amounts, the income limitations for that as well. So, thanks, Dad. So this is kind of interesting. You see here, their taxable income would have been $71,000 under the old tax law. Taxable income under the new is $82,000. So if you just looked at those two numbers initially, it looks like, oh no, you've got $11,000 more of taxable income. But because the brackets change so much when it comes down to it, in this case it's what, $200 more, $300 more of tax. So hardly anything. Which is kind of interesting. Let me go down and show you this. So I like looking at this kind of description of it once I know what the details are. Because this, I think, it's a great visual to see where you are in the brackets, like how close you are to the next one. So you can see in this first example, almost all of their income was in this 15% tax bracket. And now that same bracket is at 12%, so you're paying 3% less tax on all of the income in this, this bucket here. And then, for the extra taxable amount, it's at the 22% bracket instead of 25 in the old law. But because more of it is at this 3% reduction, then the overall is not so horrible. So, the tax bracket on the ordinary income then was 15% versus 22, but then the effective tax rate, so that basically takes the average of what you're paying on all of the different brackets, ends up being the same at 8%. And if now that we are in that 22% bracket for the next chunk of income, that would be 22%. Sorry, here we go. Any more income would be at that 22% rate. The other way you can look at this is if you did any more charitable contributions or IRA contributions that you could write off, or 401k contributions at work, that's going to save you 22% and bring you back down into this lower level. And there's a lot of different things we can do. We can set this up so we have 3 different columns to compare to. And it's kind of fun. I had a client recently who was receiving a large income payout, which that happens sometimes when people will like take an early retirement. They'll get a big chunk of taxable cash, one of the tools that we'll often use is something called a donor advised fund, where if you're getting a big chunk in 1 year, but you're not going to have that every year, you can take a portion of that and gift that into a donor advised fund and kind of accelerate your charitable write-offs for that year. So that, because like a lot of people, if they're taking that big payout and then they're going to be retired, they might have lower income going forward and then not be able to have enough deductions to itemize, and they just be getting that $24,000. So if you have a year where you have a large sum for whatever reason, you could do this donor advised fund where you basically make a gift into a fund that a charitable foundation manages, and then you get that write-off against that higher income that same year, and then later when you're in your lower income years, then you can direct the money from that donor advised fund to whatever charity you want to give it to. And you don't get an additional write-off down there, but you got the write-off in the year where you had the large income when you actually needed it. So we have a lot of people that are doing things like that, or bundling their charitable contributions in 1 year and then like into a donor advised fund so that they get a write-off in 1 year. Or, and this will probably drive Jim crazy, but we've told...
Too late.
We've had suggested to some people, well, why don't you do your contributions for 2 years in 1 year? But just make sure you let the finance guy, or gal at your church know that this is not every year. I'm doing 2 years at once. I'm going to take a year off, 2 years, so that you can get the higher write-off. So there's a lot of fun kind of planning you can do around it, especially when you have the tools to be able to, the tools to be able to use to see the different examples. Now the other thing I think that is interesting, get out of this. Hello. Okay, so I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to assume that Joe Luther retires. I was trying not to make everybody busy, but I think I ruined that. Okay, so let's say that there is no income. Okay, and let's do it here too. And I'm going to, let's see. Interest. Okay. I still want to see it. Just let me see it here. Okay. Sorry. I may have been too drastic in my example here. is that limitation that I was talking about, that you can only deduct 60% of your adjusted gross income. And I understand this, that they're saying we may not be able to deduct the whole thing all at once. I'm just going to delete it for now, since it doesn't seem to be letting me go ahead. Okay. So in reality, what you can do, if you have a year where you're contributing more than you can actually write off, you can carry forward some of that deduction to other years. Okay. Let me go back here, because what I'm trying to show you is the Social Security taxation. This is another area that a lot of people are not always aware. Sorry. There we go, that's what I'm looking for. So the amount of Social Security that you pay tax on depends on the rest of your income. And what a lot of people don't realize is that even, so in this example at the top here, I zeroed out the regular income, but then in this example showed that there was $50,000 of tax exempt interest. So this would be interest that would be coming from things like municipal bonds, that kind of thing. And I'm just looking for there it is, so there's our Social Security. Okay, so you see how in this first example, 80% of the Social Security would have been taxable. In this example, with basically zero taxable income, then none of the Social Security would be taxable. In this example, the only thing I did different is I added $50,000 of tax exempt interest, which you would think wouldn't affect your Social Security, but when they calculate whether Social Security is taxable or not, they actually use half of the Social Security amount, anything that shows on this regular income, and tax exempt interest. So sometimes people are surprised by the fact that their tax exempt interest can actually make their Social Security taxable. In this example, it's only $300, but it's still just to make the point. So,
tax-free income from Roth though doesn't do the same as municipal bond type income, right?
yes, thank you. Yeah, and that's a huge thing. So a lot of what, in fact, let's move into the kind of the middle section of what we're talking about today, which is tax efficient investing. Because Roth IRAs are sort of the greatest gift to mankind from the financial world, where anything that you have in a Roth IRA, when you take it out, it's tax-free. There are limits, though, as to how you can get money into a Roth. And if you made too much money when you were working or while you were working, a lot of people can't contribute to a Roth. And yet what we're seeing with a lot of employers who have 401ks is that they are allowing Roth 401k contributions, which is really, really nice. So one thing that I would suggest just as an exercise, maybe to do on your own, is if you grabbed one of these, and you could do it yourself on a piece of paper too. You want one, Dad?
Yeah, there's some people that don't have.
Oh, okay. So it's a great little just worksheet to help give you a one kind of picture snapshot of your portfolio. Dad, would you mind pulling the whiteboard up? I think it's on rollers, and maybe we could just sort of walk through this exercise.
This, by the way, is this form is one that Sheriff has used with us for about 20 years, and was our kind of report card every year on how we were doing on getting money to the right. on that, those columns. So I love this one.
Okay, maybe, hopefully there's one that works here. I could never have been a teacher because my handwriting is horrific, but hopefully you can read it. So what we will often do is sit down and look at your total assets so you can kind of categorize and figure out what your tax diversification is versus your regular portfolio diversification. That's usually what people talk about is, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want them all in one stock or one bond or one type of security. So this is a completely different way of looking at your assets. So the things that fall into the tax now column are, and you can feel free to throw ideas out if you have some, but like your checking account, savings, things that are at the bank, CDs,
Mutual funds.
Yep, mostly tax now. And what's interesting about these is that some people don't realize that money that they have in these areas, even if they're not taking the money out, if it's just sitting there at the bank or sitting there in your mutual fund, you're still paying tax on it, along the way.
Bonds and government bonds.
There we go. Yep. Okay.
Those are all investments not in retirement plans.
Good point. These are all investments not in retirement plans. Yep, because you can have mutual funds, bonds, and stocks in retirement plans. So the things that are taxed later are retirement plans. So IRAs, 401ks, 403bs if you work for a charitable employer or education. Non-qualified annuities, which are, non-qualified means it's not a retirement plan, but money in an annuity, the interest is tax deferred. So I'm going to say NQ for non-qualified. And there's all kinds of annuities that you could have. It could be a fixed or a variable or an indexed. So all of those would fall into that category. Anything else I'm not thinking of?
Capital gain properties.
That's true. Yeah, so we said stock dividends, but stock growth, until you sell it.
Long-term capital.
Pensions?
Pensions. Anything else? I think we've covered it all. Things that are in the taxed never column. Roth? Yes. So Roth, IRAs, and I'm going to say 401ks as well.
And 403bs.
Municipal bond interest. So muni bond interest, I keep leaving that little RE out. It depends, it can either be just federally tax-free or federal and state tax-free if it's a California bond. And the growth, if there is any growth in a muni bond, like in a municipal bond fund, that is not tax-free. So that's why I'm saying interest.
Cash value life insurance.
So non-modified endowment contract, like a cash value life insurance, which means sometimes people will have life insurance that they use like an investment where they'll put a lump sum into it. That typically becomes what's called a modified endowment contract, which is where the interest is tax deferred. But if you went to take money out of it, it would be taxed in a reverse order, which is last in, first out, meaning that the interest you would take out would be taxable. So in this case, if you don't put a lump sum in and you have a little bit less cash value in, but up to the IRS maximum, then you can take money out tax-free. So that's why I'm trying to clarify. Is there anything else? Non-modified endowment contract. Trying to be compliant. Life insurance cash value, and that can be like the annuities. That can be lots of different things. You can have fixed interest, guaranteed whole life insurance. You could have variable contracts that are invested in stocks and bonds. I think that covers it. So what I think is interesting is when we look at people's overall portfolios, and then you start writing down your numbers, like how much I have in each of these different areas. It can be really eye-opening to see whether you're balanced or not. And usually what we see is that people have about this much in the tax never column. They've got, maybe something a little more in the tax now, and they've got a huge amount in the tax later. Or what we see often is that people are getting to that point. Like if you're working and you're contributing as much as you can to your 401ks and your Iras and trying to, reduce your current taxes, you may not have that much here now, but, add a little compound interest in several years. And then what happens is you see this thing mushroom. And I don't know if this is a Lutheran thing or just a real thing across the board, but what is so interesting is that, we have a lot of people who are really good savers, and people live within their means and they put money away for later when they're going to need it. Well, what happens often is that when people get to retirement, well, they've maybe paid down their mortgage and, they've lived within their means and now they don't need as much as they thought. I mean, sometimes that happens, not always. But what happens more often than not is that people keep delaying when they take money out of their IRAs and their 401ks. So, you have to take money out once you turn 70 and a half, you have to start taking withdrawals. But there are a lot of people who don't take any money out of them until age 70 and a half. And then what we're seeing is that when that happens, now their IRAs and 401ks have grown so much that the required minimum distribution you have to take from them is really big. And then we take that and go back to that, tax what if page, and just taking their required distribution often will push people up into the next tax bracket. Which is so, that's not how it's supposed to work, right? You're supposed to be able to put your money there when you're in your higher earning years and save the taxes with the assumption that you'd be in a lower tax bracket when you retire, and that doesn't always work. And so this is something that we try to look at ahead of time to, make some predictions. Well, if we keep contributing at certain levels, where am I going to be 10 or 20 years from now? I even did this myself. I mean, I talk to people about this all the time, but I still was doing it. I was still putting as much as I could into my 401k, and I looked at it not too long ago and realized that I've set myself up to have a problem because I'm putting as much, I wanted to save taxes now, and then I realized, well, now that I'm 52, I'm, there's, some money in there now, and now it's going to sit and grow, and I'm still continuing to add to it. And I'm going to have to take a lot out when I hit 70 and a half. So I switched from contributing to the 401k and I switch to doing it all to the Roth, which means I'll pay a little more tax on it now, but then at least I'll have, something kind of building up over here. Sometimes people are already at that point. So this is where you can use the new tax laws to your advantage. So one of the things with the new tax laws is that a lot of it is going to be phased out in 8 years. So we know we're in this window of time. We don't know what's going to happen after that. Maybe some of it'll stay. Maybe some of it'll get worse. Maybe some of it'll get better, which is hard. Better as far as less tax, which is hard to imagine. But what we do know is that we have a window where we know what those rates are. So what we are doing with a lot of people is helping them to look at that and the rest of their picture to see, are there things we can take advantage of? For example, let's say you're going to retire in next year, and we have several clients who are in this situation where they were 67, going to retire now, and they have a couple of years until they turn 70 when they'll be forced to take money out of their Iras. So what we've done is try to look at their tax bracket to see how much room do they have in their current bracket. And if there's a $11,000 gap from where they are to the top of their bracket, well, does it make sense to maybe take something out of their IRA, take that $11,000 out, use that, and get it over here in this tax never column, and do a Roth conversion. And do that for those years until they're forced to take money out of the IRA. Then you stop doing those conversions, but then you've effectively reduced what was in your IRA, so then you've reduced what you have to take out of your IRA. So anything that goes into your Roth can sit there forever if you want, or it can be your place that you go take tax-free income when you want to take a trip or do something that's a bigger expense, but not have to push yourself into the next tax bracket. And I was suggesting that to a client the other day, and because of the standard deduction going up to $24,000, we were looking at, well, let's do $24,000, and then it's tax-free money. You're not going to pay any tax on it. I was feeling really good about him paying no tax, and he was looking at it, and then he said, well, could I do more and just pay a little more tax? And well, yeah, you could. Because the next bracket is still only 10%. So it just depends on your whole picture.
So when you do the conversion, the tax that you would pay is based on your current income tax rate.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with how much you're moving in from the 401k, for example, into a Roth, traditional IRA. So if your tax rate is 32%, if you go to move it, it's going to be at 32%?
Essentially. So like if
Whatever you move in is income.
yeah, so if you move 50,000 over, for example, then it's going to be like $50,000 of regular income. So if you are at the 22% federal bracket, it just depends on how much room you have in that bracket, if it'll all be taxed at 22 or if some of it might be taxed at the next.
Okay, so what you've been doing is saying, okay, you're at 22, let's move this amount over that will prevent you from going up to the next bracket.
Yeah, that's what we try to do, and then it's it's up to each person. But
How about penalties for early removal?
if you are over 59 and a half, you don't have to worry about that.
I am, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, we don't do it if somebody is under 59 and a half because it's not worth the 10% penalty. Yeah, good point. All right, any other questions on that? Then we can also get really creative if you're trying to move some money over and let's say you're also charitably inclined, well, then you can do a combination and maybe moving some of your IRA or 401k money over allows you to make a charitable gift and actually get a write-off for it. So then you can get a double win where you move money into the tax-free category and you also get a write-off for money that you want to give that you wouldn't have been able to get a write-off for before. So lots of different ways you can do these things and different examples. But I just wanted to give you a couple of ideas that maybe would get you thinking. And these are things that are really important to work with your tax person and your financial person to make sure that you do it right and that you're not caught unaware. Which reminds me, Medicare premiums. Most people who are of that age are well aware, painfully aware of how the Medicare premiums work now. But if you make too much income, or if you have a year where you have a large amount of income because you sold your, your medical practice, or you got a big payout from your former employer, that can haunt you for a couple of years with higher Medicare premiums. So this is where it's also, again, important to work with a tax person and or a combination of that and a financial person who understands tax law to make sure that you are looking at all the factors. So that's one of the things that is part of our calculation, is looking at what the Medicare premiums are. And that's another important reason that if you can get more in your tax-free column, then when you take income from this, it doesn't count against your Medicare premiums, which sometimes that even just saving that is a huge, because it could be anywhere from $134 a month to $400 a month per person for Medicare premiums. And that's all based on what your taxable income is. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left. Let's talk about some charitable planning. So there are really three kinds of charitable giving. Some of it is that unplanned giving that is just pops up in front of you, like the I was going to say Girl Scout, but the kid down the street who says, "Hey, can you make a donation to my baseball team because we're trying to raise money to do whatever." The caring ones, you throw those in the plate. You don't really think about it. You just put whatever's in your pocket there. Can you think of any other examples? There's so many.
Project response food.
Oh yeah, great.
I just write them a check every time and then it's tax deductible.
Very nice.
Do what? Write a check to project response.
Yeah,
And
good
then it's
idea.
tax deductible and I don't have to shop groceries.
Exactly. Perfect.
It is tax deductible if you buy the groceries too.
Yeah. It is, but that's a lot
But
more work.
it's-
That is true.
yeah.
And I usually never did that part of the work, so.
Yeah, and then you have to hold on to your receipt
Yeah.
and make sure yeah.
I always like to do the shopping and get a whole bunch of cans, so it's hard for the core shoppers to put it in their car. Yeah.
Some people get their jellies, in strange ways.
They call it ornery.
Yeah. So there are all kinds of things like that usually they pop up. A lot of that most people don't plan on or work it into their budget. Some people do. So if you're writing a check to project response, that would make it easier to kind of track and probably work into your budget. But a lot of times people just give based on, how much do I have in my pocket, and then that's how they make their gift. So there's that kind of giving. Then there's the more ongoing giving that people do to their church or to their school, their alma mater. Writing checks kind of on a regular basis, or just that sort of regular sustaining kind of giving that usually comes from your current income. And then there's the more sort of complicated, sometimes, not always, planned giving. So when we talk about planned giving, then it's usually part of an overall estate plan, overall financial plan. And when you start to get a feel for how your finances are set up or how your whole portfolio is set up, then it's easier to figure out, well, could I make some sort of a planned gift? Because if you don't really know if you have enough that's going to last for your entire lifetime or your entire retirement, it's hard to feel generous about giving some of that away. But when you have information and clarity that yes, I do have enough, then that can be so freeing to know, like, wow, there's like all of this money in my IRA that I thought I was really gonna need, and I'm gonna be okay, and I could afford to give 10,000 a year from it or something like that. So making sure that you have enough is really important first, and then you can get really creative. Depending on the kind of assets you have, you can make gifts that will give you a charitable deduction now, will help your favorite charity later, and could also give you income now or income in your retirement, depending on how close you are to retirement. And some of the common, I think, misconceptions about planned giving are that either you have to be really rich or really old or not have any kids that you care about leaving anything to, or have a super complicated estate. And really none of those things are true. That's one of the most fun parts of my job, is helping people figure that out. And I'm thinking of a widow of a Lutheran pastor, and you all know they don't typically make huge amounts of income, she wanted to make a lasting gift, but also that's where her heart was, but she also needed income. And so what we did is we took one of her stocks that she had that had grown, but she didn't want to sell it because she knew she'd have to pay a lot of capital gains tax on it if she sold it. So instead we took that stock, gifted it to a foundation. Then she got a tax deduction for the charitable gift, and then they turned it around and are giving her income that she gets every year that is now bigger than the dividend she was getting on the stock. And when she passes away, then the value of the stock will go to her charity. And there's, we just actually did a life insurance policy, Scott and I did, that's going to benefit the church foundation and the school foundation. So I split it in half. It's going to be hopefully a really, really long time until it pays off. But the current benefit to us is that we get a tax deduction for the amount of premium. And then, I've been in this business for 28 years. And so one thing that I have learned is that things change. People will make a plan, and it may be a great plan at the time and based on good current information, but there are just things that happen that people can't predict. And so I thought about that with this too, with this life insurance policy, thinking, well, am I really going to want to pay on it for 20 years? And maybe I will. And if I don't, then there's a provision where I can do what's called a reduced paid up option with it, where I can say, okay, I've paid all I can pay. Now reduce it so I don't have to pay anything more, and make sure that it's going to last forever. So I know that I have that option. We did that when we first got married for PLU, because I thought it would be fun to do something, and it was so cheap. So that was the other advantage. Let's see. In this handout, this charitable giving handout, there are a couple of simple examples. The Charitable Remainder Trust. Oh, actually, let me talk about this first. A couple of things about the transfer taxes. I got an email just the other day from a client who wanted to help his kids, and they were worried about giving them too much money because of the estate taxes or gift taxes. And when I explained what the new tax law was, he kind of laughed and thought, okay, we'll be fine. So basically that the gift tax and estate tax exemption was doubled. So you can give about $11 million, or you can leave $11 million to your family without having to pay estate taxes. Right? It covers most people. So yeah, for most people, you don't really have to worry about that. And that could change, that may be grandfather, or maybe sunsetted, but that's how it is for now. The simplest thing you could do is make just outright bequest in your will. And it's amazing how many people are really good, consistent, current givers, but they don't have something set up like this. And it's free. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to do it. And if it's important to you to give while you're living, you know, what better way to kind of show to your family that, yeah, this was really important to me and I still want to make sure it's important. So you could do something really simple and just say give 10% of everything that's there to, you know, a charity or a foundation or a donor advised fund that maybe you set up while you were living. And I had a client, Ted Jensen. I don't know if any of you knew him. Dad did. This is 20 years ago. He wanted to do something that would teach his kids and his grandkids how important giving was to him. So he set up a donor advised fund where he put money in there and then set it up so that every year the grandkids would have to get together with him and decide what to do with the interest that was coming off the top. And it was not a huge amount, you know, $500 I think is what they got the first year. And he sat down with them and they decided they wanted to give money to their preschool. And so they went to the preschool and talked to the teachers there to find out what they could really use. And they decided that they wanted to buy some tricycles for the preschool. So then they went to the Toys R Us with the money from the donor advised fund, bought the tricycles, brought them back to the preschool, and just made it so real, you know, to those kids. Like, what a difference as opposed to just that, in that case, not just writing a check was a good thing. But anyway, so I love that idea. So you could set up something like that and then add a charity as a beneficiary of your IRA or your will or trust, and then have that money added. And then if something like that is important to you for your family, you can require that they get together every year to decide where the funds go. Or you could set it up ahead of time and say, I want every year, I want 5% to go to XYZ. So it's really easy to change the beneficiary on a life insurance policy or an annuity or an IRA, and just put a percentage on there to a charity. You just need their tax ID number. And then it's nice to let the charity know that it's coming.
Just a comment, if you're doing it through a will and you want a percentage to go to church or charity, it's a lot more income tax efficient if you say, I want specific assets in that middle column to go to the church or charity. Because if they go to your other beneficiaries, then they're taxable to them. So have the other assets go to your family and the ones in the middle column to go to church or charity, because they don't pay any income tax.
Yep, very good point. On the back, it talks about charitable annuity trusts and leave trusts and remainder trusts. And those are all just basically ways to give an asset that is in this tax later column. Property should have been over here too, real estate. Where you can make a gift and depending on what your circumstances are, set it up so that you get a tax deduction now if you need income now or income later, or just a gift for later. Some people don't like, or what they feel is a disadvantage if they do too much giving. This is the thing I hear most often from clients when I say, hey, you want to add, a percentage on your IRA beneficiary to your church, because I see that you give to your church now. And what they usually say is, somebody else can take care of it after I'm gone. They can take care of the church. I want the money to go to my kids. And from a kid's perspective, like most kids are going to get enough. So, if 10% of what you have goes to the charity, it's probably not going to affect their standard of living. But there are cases where doing a gift can create enough additional income that people who really want to make sure the whole thing is replaced to their kids will take some of that income, they'll use that to buy a life insurance policy to replace the value or part of the value of that gift to their kids. So there are ways to compensate for that if that's important to you. Yeah, just a simple beneficiary designation is probably the simplest thing that you can do. I think that puts us at, well, we have 2 minutes. Questions?
When we used a tax account to do our taxes, and when we got ours back, it showed this year's column and next year's column, so it was kind of laid out for us what.
I have seen that.
And I
It's so
happened to
nice.
page through it and saw it, so usually I just file it because I figure it's right, but for whatever reason I page through it. So people might wanna do that, and it might be all laid out for them, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel or think too hard about it.
Exactly, yeah. And I think the only time you want to think about it is if you want to do some planning with it.
Right,
You know, to make sure that you're taking advantage of different things. But yeah, I've seen that on a lot of tax returns, is that the summary is right there, which is so nice if your income is going to be the same, you know, essentially from one year to the next, just to see, you know, what that impact is going to be. Jim?
I just wanted to emphasize one of your points, that I think I understand and it makes a lot of sense. If you want to move dollars from the tax layer to the, for Roth conversions, you can determine the amount of tax, I guess, you can afford to pay right now, and then essentially work on a contribution to eliminate that or to reduce that, and you're still paying the same amount, but you're giving it to a charity as opposed to government.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And that also just reminded me, we talked a lot about this last year, so I don't want to beat a dead horse for those of you who know this very well. But when we're talking about IRAs and contributions to charities, when you are 70 and a half or older and you have to take that required minimum distribution, it makes way more sense to do that directly from your IRA to the charity and not do your regular check if you're doing one big one. Because it takes that IRA, let's say it's $10,000, it takes that $10,000 right off the front page of your tax return, which then reduces your overall income, of course. So then you don't have to worry about whether you can actually write off the charitable contribution or not. Then you essentially still are getting the value for that gift as a write-off. And it also won't negatively impact your Medicare premiums. So when we've done that what-if calculation, and for many people where we just have zeroed out what they normally do for charitable giving, reduced their IRA distribution by that amount, it's reduced what they are paying in Medicare premiums for many people and reduced their overall income. So that also is a really, really good strategy.
So you can do that once you get 59 and a half, or do you have to be 70?
Yep, you have to be 70 and have to do that. Yeah, because it's called a qualified charitable contribution, distribution. But to do the Roth
There is
conversion.
one benefit of being
For being
70
old.
and a half.
But to do the Roth conversion, that's where you want to be 59 and a half or older. So, yeah, all these.
But you can only get into a Roth if your income is.
No, so that is, it used to be that you could only do a Roth conversion if you were under a certain level of income. So that income has been thrown out.
The income is for regular contributions to an IRA, but for converting
You can do
what's
it.
already in an IRA, regular IRA, to a Roth. That's the,
Then there's no.
Yeah, I thought
No
you had
income.
to do the whole, 401k at once, but
no.
it sounds like you can do it annually.
You can do it
Portion.
annually, yep.
Okay.
And, like plan, maybe I just do it for 3 years and then don't do it anymore, just, yeah.
They had us do that a number of years ago, and it's really a tough decision because you're paying a lot of tax right now, and you gotta find that money somewhere, and it hurts, it's distasteful, it makes you throw up. And then you do that, and now we're really, really excited about having done that because it's tax-free.
Right.
Yeah.
If I were to convert from the IRA to the Roth, I'm 70, over 70 and a half, does that count as my RMD when I do it, or do the RMD care?
Yeah.
They want the
They want their money. Yeah. Yep.
So it's time.
Yep.
Once you do it, your R&D gets really close.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's how the math works.
Yeah, yeah.
If you do it all, it's zero.
Just give it all.
It sure hurts.
But we don't want you throwing on people.
That's right, you didn't throw up. Well, if anybody has any questions, I do have a card over there and a little card that says I want to learn more if you have questions. And otherwise, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure.